We're going to watch another clip from the Douglas Murray conversation with John Anderson. I've been challenged to give a more substantive response to the accusations or allegations that Murray is making against contemporary culture, academia especially. Of course, my contention is just that Murray has been incredibly vague as to what his actual allegations are, what his actual problems with society are. You know, from my perspective, it seems like it seems to center around being too progressive, right, in regards to equal rights, equal opportunities, equal outcomes for gender, racial, and sexual minorities. He would probably frame it, you know, a little bit differently. But I guess we're going to watch another clip. I might talk a little bit about the cultural Marxism idea, why I think that's a sort of a poor analysis of the situation in contemporary academia. But that's going to depend on whether he even gets into it in this clip at all. All right.
One of the things I started to notice in the last 15 or so years in particular was that effectively a new metaphysics, that is, a new foundational morality, appeared to be...
It's not what metaphysics means.
...installed in our society.
Oh, that's another thing I should mention. Like, I'm not coming at this from the perspective of like an aggrieved sociology student. I'm a philosophy major, or at least I was until May when I graduated. I'm just interested in the underlying logic of their arguments, and I am interested in in academia generally. But like, to be clear, like, I'm not an expert on leftist sociological theory. It's not what I studied. My interests are like Wittgenstein and Kant. But
and it went something like this. And again, one can regret this or admire it, but I think most people will recognize something like it. That not very long ago, if you wanted...
But, okay, let me pause again. When he uses the word metaphysics to refer to a foundational morality, it suggests somebody who's a little bit out of their depth, somebody who doesn't quite know what this terminology means. And it's funny to me because of how pompous this guy is and how self-certain he is. I guess I probably come across the same way to a lot of you, but it's very interesting to me, and that's why I'm doing these videos. I'm not sure who I'm responding to right now. Anyway, this is just me, Thale, talking. We're 28 seconds into the video. All right, let's go.
To be seen to be an ethical or good person, there were certain things that were perhaps expected of you. Broadly speaking, they were the inheritance of the Judeo-Christian tradition.
This term Judeo-Christian, I made a video about this. This is not a term from academia. I don't even think that this is a term used outside specifically sociology. I don't think this is a term. This is certainly not a term used in ethics or metaphysics. Okay.
And this
includes... Like, why not say Christian? He obviously means Christian, and he obviously means right-leaning Christian, right? Because there are certain there are like left-leaning theologians. There are leftist theologians. I would recommend a guy called David Bentley Hart, who's a socialist and a theologian. Excellent writing, excellent book. There's a book called The Experience of God, Being, Consciousness, Bliss. Fantastic book. But he would never use a phrase like Judeo-Christian morality. Anyway, I'm so sorry.
Things like charity, forgiveness, virtue, as understood in the...
Charity and forgiveness. I mean, people have, obviously, right, the sociologists are going to have critiques of charity as an institution. We're going to say, that it's not a sufficient way of redressing imbalances in society. Virtue, this seems almost tautological, right? Morality is about virtue. Well, what is virtue?
That tradition, and a lot more. And then at some point in the last 15 years, I say sped up very clearly in the last 10 years and then weaponized in the last 5. We see this another form of morality, not totally dissimilar in some of its appearances. And that is that in order to be a good person, to be seen as a good person...
So before we had Judeo-Christian morality, and that was defined by being virtuous and giving to charity. Again, is there evidence to suggest that this has declined? I don't know if charitable donations have declined in the last 15 years, but it's an empirical claim. Seems questionable to me. Now we're getting to the new kind of morality. My guess is this is going to include progressivism. Hence, his issue is with progressivism, right?
In a society like Australia or Britain, you would need to stress, for instance, that you were anti-racist, as if everybody else in society was profoundly racist and you were one of the few brave souls willing still to battle racism.
I mean, like, obviously racism is still a problem in our society. It's unclear to me if his critique is we are now incorporating anti-racism into our morality, to which I would say, do you think it wasn't in our morality prior to it being included in the last 15 years, meaning that racism was a serious problem until we started talking about it? Or are you saying that the history of, let's say, Australia or the United States wasn't incredibly racist and didn't, or was always not very racist until people started just, I guess, quote unquote, virtue signaling their anti-racism? That's the only significant change, as people started talking about racism more. In which case, I would just point you to all of the empirical evidence of, like, you know, incredible like amounts of state-sponsored racism that existed prior to the civil rights movement. I guess we're talking about the period from like the 60s until like the early 2000s or 1990s, maybe something like that, in which case we're getting a little fuzzier, but again, still incredible amounts of racism. But honestly, like, underlying all of this and I feel like underlying conservatism generally, although maybe types of leftism as well, or types of social liberalism as well, is just this incredible anger at the idea of somebody who has taken a moral high ground, somebody who presents as somebody who has reasoned their way to a position that makes them more moral than you. Now, I'm not going to comment. I can't comment right now on the prevalence of this type of people. I don't see this as being more prevalent on the left than on the right. I would say that to some extent this is exactly what Douglas Murray is doing right now. He's presenting himself as somebody who has found a moral high ground. But I really don't relate to the just incredible anger that this inspires in certain types of people. Like, if somebody has found a position that makes them more moral, or more, quote unquote, I won't even say virtuous because that's vaguer, but more moral than me, then what I'm going to want to do is think about the issue and look at the issue presented and determine, well, do I need to adjust my positions in order to arrive at this more to arrive at a more moral conclusion? And if not, I can disregard it. But I don't understand the incredible amount of emotion, negative emotion, that the idea of this kind of person inspires in people. And I really do think that this is what underlies a lot of conservatism, what underlies a lot of the intellectual dark web and PragerU and the kinds of people that I've been responding to lately.
You would need to present yourself as being entirely on the side of women in any and all circumstances, and really talk about it an awful lot, you know.
I don't understand. I don't really know what to do with this critique. I don't think anyone thinks you have to always be on the side of women in every circumstance. Whether you have to talk about it an awful lot. I mean, most people are totally pretty apolitical in the way that they present themselves. I don't know.
If you're a man, stress your feminist credentials. A tendency which, as you know from reading The Man, is...
So are we talking about the actual ideas underlying things like feminism, or are we talking about people needing to present themselves in a certain way and act in a certain way all the time? Because these are unrelated criticisms. The ideas of feminism could be completely valid, and people could be very annoying about signaling that they agree with them all the time.
Crowds I'm intensely skeptical of. You need to talk about LGBT all the time, or at least as often as possible. And these, as well as a few other things, you might add in green and perhaps a couple of other things. became what you stress in order to show that you're a good person. Now, these in the end, I started to realize.
So, like, conversely, can you signal to conservatives that you're a good person by showing how little you care about these things? Because that seems to be what you're doing.
Becoming load-bearing walls, which I became very worried about, and am very worried about, because they can't bear the load. My view is that LGBT rights, equal rights for women, equal rights for people, whatever their racial origin, is a very desirable endpoint. But it's an endpoint of liberalism in the good sense, as we might understand it. It's a hideous foundation. Why? For two reasons in particular. The first is that
So he's saying it's fine and good if we reach that point, but it's not good to be actively pursuing it. It's not a good foundation for morality. Now, I agree that at rock bottom, your moral foundation should not be based around social inclusion or social equity. You should have a layer of morality that's more abstract that underlies it. But as far as a guide for practical action, when a lot of the problems that we happen to be facing in society are based around systemic discrimination or even interpersonal discrimination surrounding identity groups, I don't think it's a poor recommendation for action to take action along these groups, to take action along the lines of along the lines of these groups, especially because it's very easy to rally people. It's very easy to rally people around fighting the oppression of particular identity groups because they have experienced it very directly. Now, unless you want to argue that it's not really a desirable end goal, I don't know how you respond. I don't know what the counter to what I've just said is. Or you argue, as we know he does, that in practice, the pursuit of progressivism doesn't lead to good things. To that, I will also disagree or challenge you to cite the actual evidence.
These bases for new morality have intense friction among themselves. So, as I point out in the trans chapter, trans and women have intense friction as rights claims.
I don't understand quite why he says trans, women, trans, green, LGBT. Why is he not using the whole term? Why are we... Okay, I don't know.
For reasons I explained. Trans and gay have intense friction between them. For reasons I go into in the Madness of Crowds. Transgender rights and gay rights. Why not say that? Why are you saying trans and gay? Is this a noun? Is it an adjective? But there's a second reason as well, which is that all of these things that we have been in societies like Australia trying to base our morality on are themselves much more unstable components than we've been willing to admit.
I don't think we're trying to base our morality on.
I say in the gay chapter at the outset, and I do gay at the outset partly because it's the only...
There's a difference between basing our activism on ideas of oppression along identity categories and basing our morality on them.
These minority things I can claim to have any crampons on the wall of the important Everest of liberal rights. Gay is much more unstable than we're willing to admit in our society. We still don't know very much about it. I think we have to be a bit more humble about some of the issues around it as a result of that.
Gay relationships?
But I get on then to the women chapter. I say, this one also is much more unstable than we're willing to admit. Are women and men exactly equal? Are men more competent than women in certain areas? Are women more competent than men in certain areas? Or have we just for convenience...
So it sounds like he's saying because gay relationships are inherently more unstable, women are inherently worse at certain high market value occupations, that pursuing equity among these groups and the dominant groups is not desirable. That seems to be the implication of what he's saying. Now everything else is secondary.
For the time being landed, for instance, in this strange place I think we're in, where we have to pretend that women are exactly the same as men and also magically better.
I don't know.
We're very uncertain about it.
I don't know how to respond to that without an example. I don't think people think that women are exactly the same as men. Otherwise, we wouldn't have two terms. I mean, you would have to show evidence that you would have to present empirical evidence, and not just evolutionary psychology conjecture hypotheses that are not currently tested, that women are as a whole and inherently biologically worse at certain and high skilled occupations. That evidence doesn't exist. And also, I'm pretty sure there is evidence to the contrary. There is evidence actively against the idea that like gay people, for instance, make worse parents or whatever than straight couples. There's evidence against that idea. So if we don't accept that, why would we oppose the pursuit of equality among these groups?
We tend to be totally certain. We're very uncertain. Race, absolute mess, which we've been trying to think about and deal with as well as we can, but there's a whole load of hell waiting for us if we keep leaning on it this hard. And then trans.
I don't know what that means. That sounds sort of like what Sam Harris tends to say about it, that like, ooh, what are we going to turn up, if we start looking at racial comparisons. We've done this. There's no evidence to suggest that race is even a meaningful way to differentiate people biologically. Evolutionary biologists don't use it when they're talking about different groups of humans. They use like clines, or you could talk about geographic population, but that doesn't track with race. So what if there's uncertainty, you're sowing the uncertainty unjustifiably. It seems in order to convince people that we shouldn't pursue equity among groups. Like that's what it seems to me like.
Which we know almost nothing about, and our societies are pretending to be incredibly certain about. And if I can sum up the problem in this in a sentence, it is that
what does that mean? We don't know enough about transgender people. I mean, there's a pretty great amount of research on this. Maybe this is from a couple of years ago when there was a little bit less research, but gender transitioning helps the mental health of transgender people. What more is there to say exactly?
Reality we're trying to construct relies on us pretending we know about things that we don't know about trans.
No, and you're pretending to know, but you're taking a position. Douglas Murray is taking a position here on all of these issues. He's taken the conservative side. If you want to say we don't know enough about it, fine, defer judgment. Don't heavily imply a particular side, which is what he's doing. Some of these things he's wrong. We actually do know about it. I'd say most of these we can be pretty certain, what's going on here. Maybe the leftists in the academia have, looked at the actual data. They've taken a side that's contrary, right, to the one he's going to take. But, either don't take a side if you think it's uncertain, or, take the side that's actually supported by the data, which is just not the one you're on, my dude. Like,
demands that we pretend not to know about things that we all knew till yesterday. Relations between the sexes.
It's very interesting to me that you clearly spell out the thing that you've just said in the book on gays, that
I'm surprised
there
you
are
didn't say
enormous
on gay.
differences within each grouping under their heading, so gays, lesbians, and so forth, and enormous differences, even frictions between them.
Yes.
And in many ways, it's, I would imagine, quite deeply resented. I mean, during the gay marriage debate in Australia, anybody who was watching the debate closely could see there was quite a range of views in the gay community. Right. Quite a range. Sure. And in fact, there were quite a few who said, we've never believed in marriage. Mm-hmm. Why would we want to do it?
Yeah, there were some who said, yeah.
But of course, you didn't see that in the...
It literally doesn't matter whether there are some gay people who don't support same-sex marriage. That would be identity politics, my dude. That would just be deferring to the opinions of an identity group to determine what's actually correct morally or legally or empirically. It's not a good methodology, my dude.
Media didn't suit the narrative. You've got other people, it seems, often using, in inverted commas, these groupings that they've put together and insist are cogent and hang together to pursue agendas of their own.
Well, often to pursue a specific political objective.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm really doing my best here, but this is just so incredibly vague. But say what the political objective is, say why you think it's immoral, then we can have that argument.
a piece in The Spectator in the UK in support of gay marriage before
Is
it was
it gay?
popular.
Is it gay marriage? Is this really? Are we really saying gay marriage is wrong now? Like, I don't even think Jordan Peterson makes that argument.
In support of gay marriage.
Maybe he implies it, but even Trump is not trying to fight gay marriage.
Explained what I regard as being the conservative case for it, which was an article which David Cameron used as a basis for his first main speech on the issue.
This guy's to the right of David
right,
Cameron.
but I also am worried by, and have been worried for a long time, by the extraordinary intolerance of elements of the so-called gay community, which I say so-called because there is no such thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
He's worried about the intolerance of the gay community. Wait, I thought we didn't care about. I thought we didn't care about anti. Well, let him finish.
See, this is one of the interesting aspects of this. There must be. There are a lot of gay people who don't want to be defined by their sexuality.
Well, just
they
like,
are a whole heap of other things.
Yeah.
They're citizens. They might be boilermakers. They might be city executives or what have you. But suddenly there's an insistence that they define themselves.
Yeah, and this has come in very recently, and it's come in each of the ones I describe, and it's a basis for madness.
What are we talking about?
When people say the gay community, who are you talking about?
You used the phrase. You said the gay community has an intolerance problem, which is strange considering it didn't seem like you cared very much about intolerance when it was directed against the gay community. And now we've jumped onto the gay community doesn't exist, as though someone else put the words in your mouth. But you used them.
Women think this. Oh, really? 50% of the species all agree on something. Blacks say this. Really?
What?
Now,
Who says that? Who says that?
This is, let me put it another way. If somebody said, I don't know, I just love the working class. Who?
Yeah.
Yes, that would be a very stupid, well, it would be a very vague thing for a person to say. If, anyone had said it and you didn't just make it up right now and then criticize it as an utterance that you came up with to caricature someone.
I just love the middle class. Who? I love the upper class. Who are you talking about? And it's the same with this. Why would we be falling for this interpretation of society as depending solely or primarily on interest groups based on gender/sex, sexual orientation, race, and a bit more?
We can when it's useful. You earlier said there's an intolerance problem in the LGBT community. That was an example of you doing it. Now, I don't know if that's true or what that means exactly, or intolerance towards whom, but that would be an example of analyzing society in this way. We can analyze society in this way when it's useful, especially when there's been a history of oppression along these lines. Doesn't mean that, quote unquote, metaphysically, or in terms of our ultimate morality, we must view society only in these terms. Doesn't mean that nobody is an individual. It doesn't mean that there aren't other ways we can group people in society. But it's an option that we have that is useful.
Be doing that? Why would we be taking the individualism out of individuals and lumping them in these demonstrably incoherent bodies that don't even exist? They don't even exist.
You said men and women are maybe inherently different. Maybe blacks and whites are, maybe LGBT parents, or maybe LGBT relationships or something are different from heterosexual relationships. You would be doing that too. You would be analyzing people on the basis of their groups. How is this metaphysically any different?
The LGBT community. Take me to your leader. Come on.
I suppose in a way...
You said there are problems in the
office,
LGBT community. What do you mean?
What struck me about so much of this is that it actually ends up dividing us hopelessly. So we're forever focusing on our differences, on the things that divide us as citizens, rather than the things that unite us. And
considering people as belonging to different groups does not inherently divide them. It depends what policies you recommend and what attitudes you recommend based on your analysis. My claim would be that your stances of there might be inherent biological differences between these groups do more to divide us than the progressive analysis, which says actually with respect to relevant abilities, these groups are not actually inherently different. That would be my claim, that it's your perspective, your analysis that does more to divide people. Okay.
That we have in common.
What if that's the point?
Well,
What if that's the point?
Yeah. So that's your second chapter.
It's just projection,
really
right? Are they not just projecting incredibly hard onto the left? Wokeness, the new Western morality.
Marxist.
On the Marxist thing. Now, this pulling together of disparate groups who have grievances that can be stoked and sort of, if you like, used as battering rams for political objectives, often without them probably even realising
that's what you're doing.
That in a sense they're being used. That perhaps they're the modern version of Lenin's useful idiots.
Yeah. There's a pattern in all of this. As I say in that chapter, you can see the intellectual underpinnings, and they come from this idea that it's a Marxist idea, but it's just transferred to the modern era, where instead of talking about society in class structures, you talk about it in minority interest group structures, and you lump.
Is this
people
overlapping
like this.
with
what is the primary aim of
video
this?
that we watched?
Among other things, it is a different interpretation of society, which is therefore intended to segregate and pull apart societies as you and I might understand them, so that people's primary affiliation is not that I'm an Australian.
Yeah, we watched
or I'm
this.
British.
I've given analysis on this in a previous video. Look, we didn't. Maybe I'll do more on the academia and Marxism thing in another video. I think I've made my point. I think I've made my points pretty well. I'm pretty happy with what I've said in this video. Like I don't see any interpretation of what these people are talking about beyond we should oppose equality for people, for groups, for no good reason. Like I don't see any other interpretation of what they're saying, where it leads logically. I don't see it leading anywhere other than that. Yeah. Okay.